Now, I had asked David before we entered the cave if he could tell us anything. He basically said, why is it that there's these minerals that only occur here and nowhere else in the world that are indications of high temperature heat very fast? He says these can only occur in the presence of a time reactor. He knows this scientifically. Now, he's sort of, when he says this, he's pandering to a scientific proof. Yet, and I don't question him 1 minute, because he's the one who brings all this up in the first place. The problem is, with the scientific proof, he's going to have to show us a time reactor and what it discharges in order to show this to the whole world.
Can you explain what a time reactor is?
Certainly. A time reactor is a device that is patented by Dr. Anderson and created by him that is designed to slow down or speed up time. The time reactor is basically a device that he created, and he worked on it to the point where he could put humans into it. And that began, he reported this in 2010, about 12 years ago. So that's what a time reactor is. And now the incredible thing about a time reactor is when in the early stages of it, of working with it, he found out that it was giving out more energy than it was putting in. This is sort of like, when you have your solar system on your house and it produces more energy than you use. So it goes back to the power company and they pay you for it. People have all heard of this. Well, this was what was happening with his device. He was charging it up, putting power in to run it, but it was producing more energy. And then he put in, and he found out that because of time dilation, there is a principle by which when a change in time occurs, there is a discharge of energy. Now, this discharge of energy is so great that it could solve the world's power problems. But that's a political issue, not a scientific issue. And it's only a scientific issue to the degree that science is ruled by politics.
You're listening to Exopolitics Today with Dr. Michael Salla, your source for the uncensored truth regarding the human, extraterrestrial, global, and political agenda. Click the like button and subscribe to this channel. And now, here's Dr. Michael Salla.
It's my great pleasure to welcome Peter Moon back to Exopolitics Today. Welcome, Peter. Tell us about your trip to Romania.
Well, thank you, Michael. It's nice to be here again. So I went to Romania this summer, at the end of July, from the, this was the third, I had not been to Romania in 3 years because of COVID restrictions. And while it was not impossible to travel to Romania, they had scaled down their operation at Atlanticron, the camp where I go to. And I just wasn't motivated to go there with all the various restrictions and whatnot. But I did return for the first time in 3 years, and it was quite a eye-opening journey. Now, the purpose of this trip was, of course, to visit Atlanticron and to renew my affiliation with it. I'm also a board member of the World Geneticist Foundation, which sponsors Atlanticron, or helps sponsor Atlanticron, which is now an independent NGO, or not-for-gain organization. Now, then what my plan was to return to Cioclovina Cave. Would be my 5th trip to Cioclovina Cave. Now, of course, Cioclovina Cave, for those of you who are not familiar in the listening audience, is considered by my friend, Dr. David Anderson, time control scientist, who actually has a time reactor. He said this is the most significant, time reactor is a time machine in effect. He said that Cioclovina Cave is the most significant place on the planet by far with regard to phenomena concerning a time reactor. And this, so I had been to there by happenstance previously, before he even told me this. The synchronicity of that fact, struck both of us as quite remarkable. So I returned there in 2016 to check it out again and look at it. And I discovered there was another cave from the main cave. The main cave is huge. You walk in, but then you have to, it's full of water and it's not easy to penetrate without equipment. So we discovered that cave. I'd already been to that cave, but then we went up and we found another cave, which was a man-made entrance, but it had a steel door shut. So there was another adventure subsequent to that where I discovered a scout camp there, this is a place that I could stay. I made friends with the owner of the camp and then returned a year later and got to go into the big cave, the huge cave. We had equipment, we had wetsuits and hard hats and equipment to go in deep into the cave. We went a mile into the cave. Now, what I discovered is that the area that I really wanted to get into was the dry cave, the higher cave. And this was the subject of last summer's visit, to get into the dry cave. Now, the dry cave requires permission, and it's not easy. Well, it might be easy to get in. I don't know. But anyway, I didn't do anything. I had a friend who'd been to the cave with me, and he arranged for permission to get into the cave. I didn't lift a finger. In fact, he said that the only reason he was able to do this was because his wife's cousin is a cave explorer, and he knew all the right things to say to get us in. And indeed, he got us in, but my friend became ill with COVID, so he couldn't come. So he transferred there was all these machinations, things can go very wrong when you're trying to do something. And here I was not really trying to do, I wanted to go in the cave, but I didn't even ask him. He just says, I've got permission for us to go in. And the owner of the camp, the permission was shifted to him. So he came with me with a friend of his, and I was also taking Dr. David Anderson's wife with me, Heather Anderson, the president of the World Geneticist Foundation. And I've known her for, 14 years or so. And we work well together. We taught together at Atlanticron. She's a professional teacher who's expert with radio and astronomy and any subject she can teach because she's got a lot of experience. So she went with me, and I got to share a lot of information with her and whatnot. And she actually came into the cave with me, a cave that, to the best of my knowledge, Dr. Anderson has not been in. And I asked him specifically if he could give us any clues as to what we would seek. Well, before I talk about that, I'm going to talk about going into the cave, where before we went into the cave, we met this spelunker, which means a cave explorer who lives above the cave. He came down and talked to us. He was very academic and had to mention this skull they found. It's one of the oldest human skulls ever found, and it's famous in archaeology, but I was not interested in this. I'm not really interested in this skull they found. It's been covered by archaeologists, talked about and whatnot, so on and so forth. I was interested in getting into the cave and being close to where these minerals are, which give evidence of a time reactor. So the man who let us in to the cave, he must have come from 45 minutes away. He was a biologist, and he had the keys to this metal door. And his name was Robert. He spoke perfect English, very nice man. And he basically was there to serve as our guide. So I asked him if there were any white bats in this cave. And he Now, the reason I asked about white bats is because I've written a book called The White Bat, and I had a dream of a white bat before I ever came to Romania, like many years earlier. So almost 20 years earlier. And he says, oh, yes, there's several white bats. And I said, well, that's very interesting. He says, they're albinos. I said, well, I've seen pictures of white bats that do not have pink eyes. He says, well, those are partial albinos. Now, I've been told separately, and it's not from a scientific source, but that there is a whole different species of white bats in Transylvania. So anyway, it was remarkable to me that actually this bat, according to the biologist, has white bats in it. I did not see any, but he opened the door. You walk down about 100 yards or so through this man-made cave, which is, it looks sort of Disney-esque if you were in a underground cavern in Disney that was a created cavern, but it's real rock and stuff. It just, the way it's hewn. And so you go in there and then you get to this metal door, which you have to, kind of crouch down to get in. I'm, over 6 feet. So it's, I have to crouch down. He kind of helps me through. Everybody gets through. There's about 5 or 6 of us. I don't remember exactly. I think maybe 5 of us with him. And we penetrate the cave and we go in, and it's not as spectacular as the wet cave, because the wet cave, you've got water rushing by. Everything seems a little sharper, and the rocks and everything. I guess it's the water that makes things so intense. But this cave was, of course, dry. It was very interesting. I've been in far more interesting caves in Romania than this one, but it's interesting. And if one's never been in a cave before, it would prove probably very interesting. There are different nooks and crannies, of course, and then some of them you could penetrate into if you were like a bat or a drone or something like that, but it's not humanly easy to do it unless you had equipment. And I don't know where they go, but there's a main road, and we're going to a place called the bivouac room. Now, the bivouac room, which means to camp out or something, but the bivouac room was of great fascination and enigmatic to me, because I could not, on the maps, it wasn't clear where it was. It was not clear to me from looking at the extant maps on the internet. So it was like a great mystery. And then I found that my friend had asked for permission to go to the bivouac room, and we were led straight there without me having to figure anything out. But on the way, there are different stations of where geologists have done exploring of minerals. So they'll be kind of roped off. I mean, they're roped off or separated. You can go into them. It's like going down into like a pit of 5 foot and looking at it. And these were of some interest. And you're looking around the cave. Finally, we get to the end of the cave, which is indeed the bivouac room. And this became of interest to me. Now, I had asked David before we entered the cave if he could tell us anything. And he had mentioned that why are, I could dig up the quote if I can find it, but he had basically said there are minerals here. I'm not going to be able to dig this up quick. So he basically said, why is it that there's these minerals that only occur here and nowhere else in the world, that are indications of high temperature heat very fast? He says these can only occur in the presence of a time reactor. He knows this scientifically. Now, he's sort of, when he says this, he's pandering to a scientific proof. Yet, and I don't question him 1 minute, because he's the one who brings all this up in the first place. The problem is, with the scientific proof, he's going to have to show us a time reactor and what it discharges in order to show this to the whole world. But
can you explain what a time reactor is?
Certainly. A time reactor is a device that is patented by Dr. Anderson and created by him, that is designed to slow down or speed up time. And I have the patent application that he submitted that I can give to anybody who's interested. You can time reactor patent, Sky Books. You should be able to download it. If not, you can write to me at petermoon333@gmail.com, and I will send you a copy of the time reactor patent. But the time reactor is basically a device that he created, and he worked on it to the point where he could put humans into it. And that began, he reported this in 2010, about 12 years ago. So that's what a time reactor is. And now the incredible thing about a time reactor is when in the early stages of it, of working with it, he found out that it was giving out more energy than it was putting in. This is sort of like, you know, when you have your solar system on your house and it produces more energy than you use. So it goes back to the power company and they pay you for it. People have all heard of this. Well, this was what was happening with his device. He was charging it up, putting power in to run it, but it was producing more energy. And then he put in, and he found out that because of time dilation, there is a principle by which when a change in time occurs, there is a discharge of energy. Now, this discharge of energy is so great that it could solve the world's power problems. But that's a political issue, not a scientific issue. And it's only a scientific issue to the degree that science is ruled by politics. But that's just a brief description of a time reactor. So when a time reactor discharges, it emits an enormous amount of heat, which will result in the manifestation of certain elements, one of which is hydroxystalactite. It's hard to pronounce and it's hard to spell, hydroxystalactite. And this is what I was interested in seeing, if I could see this. So he had given us or loaned us via his wife a spectrum analyzer and an EMF detector. And I had an engineer with me, a former colleague of David's, not in the time travel business, but he came with me, and he monitored these things. But we were, what we were conducting was not a scientific expedition. We were poking around because just to get into the cave was I'd been working on this since 2016. This is like 6 years it took me to actually find a way to get permission to get into the cave. And it was just through my connections and associations that I was able to do this. So we just went in, and basically we found one area. Well, there were a few areas, but one area where there was a pit about maybe 6 feet deep, maybe not much more than that. And there was this yellow powder. And the yellow powder put out a frequency of, I think it was 23 to 24, or maybe it was 2.3 to 2.4 gigahertz. David said it should be 23 to 24 gigahertz. So it was a harmonic of what he said. It was yellow. It looked like sulfur, but I don't believe it was sulfur. So that gave out a reaction. Then we found a little alcove, a little tiny area, which looked like the hydroxystalactite. And I gave a piece to Heather because she's into gems and crystals and minerals. I said, maybe you can evaluate this better than I can because you're already into that. And what was important, so of course I gave that to her, and we had an adventure, I can say. But what was important to me was that I actually go to this area and witness it. And when I say witness, I'm talking about not just visualizing it, but being there. It's sort of like a quantum correspondence to this place, which David says is so important. I'd already been to the cave 6 years earlier, or actually even 8 years earlier. But it took me 8 years to kind of go in and sort of touch this spot. And if I didn't touch the exact spot, I was so close to it that it's insignificance. It was important for me to be there. And another very important connection that I made on that trip, which was really the apex of the whole trip to me, when you're trying to do something, this magical date of August 12th, what happened during this biorhythm. And see, I originally visited this cave during what we call the Montauk biorhythm every August 10th to 14th, also known as the Lion's Gate in Egypt. It's the portal. It's considered a portal, a biorhythm. So these events always occur during this time period. So on this year, what I was able to do was connect Heather, David's wife, to my in-laws. And now, because we visited my in-laws who, have a beautiful home in Transylvania, which is new. They didn't always live there. And we visited them, and the synergy between the two of them was over the top. So you meet two people, you want them to get along, you want to meet them, but it was just over the top synergy correspondence. And to me, this was a big sign that I have connected my my time travel family, if I can, and I can kind of call them that because although I don't see them very often, I'm kind of close to them, and I do consider them like family. And then my actual in-laws in Transylvania, it's like connecting my two families together, or two of my families. I have other families, including my genetic family, but connecting them all together.
Well, can I just
Sure.
get clarity here about the Cioclovina Cave and this time reactor? I mean, you talked about David Anderson having a patent for a time reactor, and of course, Cioclovina Cave is very important in terms of it being related in somehow being a time reactor. So what was it about Cioclovina Cave that there was evidence of some sort of time dilation effects?
Well,
I mean,
it's mineral. It's in the minerals. It's the hydroxystalactite, which is this mineral that's kind of orangish, and it only can occur with high heat. Now, if you read the scientific papers on it, they say, well, this is a combustion of bat guano. That cave was mined and created. Not the cave was created, but the tunnel to it, the man-made tunnel, was created to mine bat guano for use in explosives during the Ceausescu regime. So all the bat guano has been mined out of it. But it would have gone up probably as high as 4 feet, if not higher. And they mined all that because it was a resource. But the scientists claim that it's a combustion of bat guano, yet in the same time, they admit it's not scientific, and there's no way bat guano can do that. It's not going to happen. So David has witnessed this with his time reactor, that when there is a discharge, it creates a high heat, which will result in the manifestation of this mineral in particular. So he said that this is evidence of a time reactor. Now, the way with David is he sort of pieces out information. There's a lot more information he could give us, but it was sort of like pulling teeth to get as much information out of him as I have. So that was, it is enigmatic, it is mysterious, but this is the path I have pursued in terms of, just look at how long it took me to get into the cave. Now, I've also talked to you in the past how the whole tradition of the Romanian indigenous spirits known as the Solomonari are there to invite you into the inner earth and for initiation. This is the tradition of their god Zalmoxis. He was initiated by being led into the inner earth for 4 years, where he received initiation and transcended from a human into a god. So this is I'm sort of living out that tradition, but it happens to come by way of a time travel scientist who brought me to Romania in the first place and pointed out this discovery of the cave. So the cave became my magnetic point of interest due to all of the things in my research leading there that led me there.
Right, but isn't that kind of like circumstantial evidence? I mean, you're seeing these minerals, or you're seeing kind of artifacts that could be indicative of some kind of high energy discharge that caused them. Now, I mean, it really is that, you know, all you would see if you go to Cioclovina Cave, these kind of like artifacts, mineral artifacts that are suggestive of a time reactor effect. But I mean,
well,
yeah,
it's circumstantial indeed, but you have to understand is what I'm tracing in this respect, and it's not my exclusive part of my journey, but I'm tracing the scientific findings and assertions of a scientist, meaning Dr. David Anderson. I'm pursuing in the wake of his scientific edifications. It's not, as I say, this was not a scientific expedition. It was, I'm poking around and I'm looking because of what he has told me. And of course, in the beginning, I said how this all started, as I said, what can you tell me about Romania? And he came back and told me about Cioclovina Cave and how it was so important for this reason, and that there was a time reactor phenomena that occurred either 200 or 2,000 years ago that they could tell by the nature of the sediment. Now, we were both very moved by the fact that I had been taken to Cioclovina Cave that previous summer by an archaeologist. And I didn't ask to go there. I was brought there. And this is the tradition of the Solomonari, or the shepherds or the sheep. They will bring you to a cave. So I was living out a tradition. And that's really more of my main impetus here, is to, because that has been my journey in Romania, is to blend into this tradition. Of course, it was introduced to me and I've been guided by it. And sometimes it's like a hand leading me when I'm not asking, and sometimes I am asking. For example, I went to this cave in 2018 and asked to get inside. I asked to get inside meditatingly, but I never asked anybody for permission to get in either cave. I was invited. This by human beings, but I was invited. I didn't say, I would like to go into this cave, to somebody who could put me there. I did say it actually to a master mason who had been into the cave because he heard me talk about it. And but I was asking him sort of playfully. It's like asking the local priest to see the Pope. He's not going to get you to see the Pope, but you can pretend like he can, put in a good word for you. And that was more of a psychic game playing. But I didn't ask to get permission. I was invited into the cave by human beings who were my friends. So, but I didn't ask them to, I didn't say, get me into the cave, please. You know, so that was sort of the journey. And I was able to bring David's wife with me, which was very special because she had never been into this area before. She'd been to Romania many, many times, but had never had the opportunity or time to go. So that was a remarkable journey. But as I say, I'm not really trying to prove anything. The proof will actually have to be delivered from him himself to the scientific world, because part of that proof, as I said before, would be showing what happens when there's a time reactor discharge. There was a documentary done. It was not done by the Discovery Channel, but it was done in conjunction with the Discovery Channel. It was to be aired there, and this is in the early 2000s, of Dr. David Anderson's time research center. It was called the Time Travel Research Center, but it was shelved. It was shelved after, what was that, 9/11 event? Yeah. So that, but the time reactor at that time was not built to the point where it could put human beings in it. It's been much more sophisticatedly refined since then. So that, and of course, the only part of the time reactor I've seen is a video of the early version that probably was similar to what the documentary would have shown.
Okay, so just going to the topic of the Bujeji mountain complex and the Hall of Record found there, during this trip to Romania, did you encounter anyone or get any more information about the existence and the current operations at the Hall of Records under the Sphinx there at the Bujeji Mountains?
Well, the only thing I can say is that about that topic is I was not particularly investigating that and on this trip, but I did meet with my publisher, who is Radu's publisher in Sorin Hormuz in Bucharest. We spent a whole afternoon together and we had a excellent time together. We get along very well. He is Radu's contact. Now, he had told me, and we weren't talking about, well, this is what he told me. Radu said the book that he's working on, which would be his 8th book, is a very difficult book. Now, he was supposed to deliver it, boy, I think it was 2 years ago, then last year, and it keeps getting delayed. And he says it's a very difficult book, and it's going to be his last book. This is what he said. He said that he has tried to, he thinks he can talk Radu into doing more books. Radu was originally supposed to do 6 books, I think, after Secret Parchment. So that would mean 10 books. And right now he's on the verge of delivering the 8th book. Now, why is it difficult? He didn't say. I don't know. But that, and why is he going to stop writing? Or he thinks he's going to stop writing. He can always change his mind. So he's changed his views, apparently. And I really don't know. So with regards to that, sometimes you hear anecdotal stories and whatnot, and I might have, but I don't really remember them because I don't really need, I'm not really in search of trying to, prove this or whatnot. I've been there so many times to the general area. But so I don't really have anything update other than on what Radu's status is. Now, he did say that he was hoping the book would get to him by September. And if it got to him by September, he could turn it around probably by December, which point he could give it to me in Romanian, and then I'd have to translate it. So it doesn't look like I have not heard a peep from him that he did receive the book. Maybe it'll be plopped in my lap or in my email inbox by Thanksgiving or something, but I don't know that. So that's the best update I can give you vis-a-vis my recent trip.
Okay, well, I'd like to spend a little bit of time now looking at book 6 in the series, the Forgotten Genesis, and I wondered if you could kind of just begin by telling us about the front cover of it, where you have the looks like some kind of stone pedestal with someone on top. I mean, I'll try and do a screen share just so we can see it, but it has some kind of genetic strands coming out of it. Yeah, I have it. I have the screen share. So you
okay. Well, I will share the concept behind the artist there. The artist who did this, who really did not wish to receive public credit for it, is basically a Hollywood producer who's very gifted. And that pedestal, he was playing off of the Montauk horse that's on a pedestal. He was playing off of integrating this because he was my go-to guy for everything. We were going to do a big media event with the Montauk Project. And so he was trying to integrate that theme of Montauk into this. And of course, the DNA, this book is all about DNA of humans and how their DNA's evolved. But this was his concept. I'm no longer working with him. I was very close to him for 6 years. but he dropped me like a hot potato without any explanation. And so this is not sort of thing is not new to me, but and perhaps it's for the best. So be that as it may, that's an explanation of the cover. But the main thing about the cover with regards to the contents of the book is it's this DNA coming out, this explanation, you know, and because, you know, the man is an incredible artist, when he deeps into his subconscious, there might be a lot of significance to what he created as art there, of it coming out of the pedestal which was in the Montauk horse, because it was always said that there was supposedly technology in that pedestal. So maybe that technology is related to this technology in the inner earth. But that's an explanation of the cover. So we can move on to basically the book. And of course, the book is basically talking, the overall description of the book is that we're talking about how changes in DNA have taken place over millennia and how mankind evolved into what it is today. And this would include explanations, positions, mythological positions with regards to Atlantis, Shambhala, Hyperborea, Troy. And he goes to, the author, Radu Cinamar, goes to extraordinary lengths to illustrate and graphically portray so many things. So he's put a tremendous amount of effort into this, and it caused him a lot of headaches just in trying to get it right.
Can you explain how he got the information in terms of some chair and holographic info being sent to him with the help of beings from Apellos?
Yes. This goes back into the history of what's in the third book, Mystery of Egypt, where they obtained these platinum tablets, which could be likened to CDs. They're not CDs, but likened to that, because if you touched a certain area of them, they would read out holographic imagery. But there was a problem in translating them. So they finally had a breakthrough, but it had to do with the usage of the chair in Egypt. It was like a chair, and it had to do with a crystal, but they hit a block. They couldn't figure out how to really read these tablets for a while. And basically, one of the beings in the inner earth came to their rescue, who they had contacted. His name was Drin, and he had appeared to them, but he was basically referred to the inner earth city of Apellos. Now, Apellos is below an area in Transylvania known as the Apuseni Mountains. I've never really been there, but according to Radu's description, there are people from the inner earth who live above ground there, and they have their own warehouses where they trade with the upper world, the surface world. And it would be very interesting, perhaps. It would really, I might consider it a waste of time, unless I had the time to spend, to just go traveling around there and looking for these beings, because they're not necessarily going to show themselves to you. And if they do show themselves to you, you know, they're probably going to surprise you, and they'll be like the girl selling flowers on the corner, and you won't, oh God, that was the person from the inner earth. It's just sort of mysterious. I wouldn't, unless I really had time on my hands, I wouldn't be going off on a journey to try and find these people. But nevertheless, he says they exist, and they basically facilitate rather sizable operations on the surface world, and that there's an interchange. And it's not just done in Romania. There would be other areas of the planet where you have surface dwellers who are really inner earth beings indulging in commerce between the inner earth and the surface world. So in any case, he is brought to this area I think he kind of describes it as a warehouse where he's offered this devices. The devices is kind of like a helmet or a visor, which could be very roughly approximated to, what do they call these, head sync devices? They have these head sync devices, but this is not a head sync device. It's much more elaborate than that, with a visor, and it basically will give a holographic projection. And it's a holographic projection where there is an interchange between what is in his mind and the beings that are teaching him from the inner earth. So it's sort of like a classroom. Like if you went into a classroom and you had a pretty advanced computer monitor there, and you were interacting with the computer rather than with a professor. And of course, the professor does appear, but in holographic form. And her name is Mentia, and she becomes his teacher, or at least one of them. And so he's like learning all of this information, and it basically goes into a series of lessons about the way human DNA evolved on this earth. And it goes back into ancient history. And of course, that's kind of what the general thesis is about. We can get more specific.
Yes, so there's these platinum tablets that had to be interpreted. So can you just kind of clarify in terms of what Radu Cinamar was seeing through these lenses, the holographic projections he was seeing through the lenses with the help of these beings from Apellos, with the holographic information stored on these platinum tablets that were retrieved from the Egypt Hall of Records?
Well, I think the best thing to do is to say an overview of what this is all about. His mentor, Caesar, is basically talking about an evolutionary leap in human beings. And he says, we have to consider DNA. If we're going to make an evolutionary leap as a species, and this is what so much of, I guess, attention is put on with people who are progressive thinkers or new age thinkers. They think of this idea and they often make comments about moving into 5D or something like this, fifth dimensional. And these things they become rather non-scientific, to say the least, and rather assuming. But he's talking about an evolutionary leap, but they're all alluding and rooting for an evolutionary leap of human beings, which is going to happen in the structure of the DNA. This is not a new idea. Nevertheless, what's being said here and what we're being taught in this book is that it's all location, environment, and even the stars have an influence over DNA over a time period. Now, of course, you can see this very commonly if certain animals have different characteristics, or even human beings in cold weather or hot weather. These are very obvious. But the point he's making is it occurs over a very long period of time, thousands of years, hundreds of thousands of years. So he's basically saying that over the millennia, that DNA has been stewarded by alien beings, but that stewardship allows for a certain amount of spontaneity. If you control everything, you're not going to have anything but a controlled situation. You have to let it a certain degree of spontaneity and randomness occur. Otherwise, it's not a progressive evolution. It's more of a robotic evolution. And that's kind of what, and there's, as they say, elite, not elite, but a long progression of evolution. I'm trying to say a long, detailed, he gives detailed explanations of how mankind evolved from a less, more primitive state into a state that was more enlightened. And he actually separates the two classes of beings, which one is more Neanderthal-like and the other is more physical or not physical, more spiritual.
Well, I want to get into how that all began. Now, in the book Forgotten Genesis, it pinpoints that 432,000 years ago, that this is when a massive sphere-shaped ship called the Nibiru appeared, and it was populated by these Sirian extraterrestrials, and that's when they began the genetic modification with primates then existing on humanity. So yeah, what can you say about, I mean, that seems to match what some have talked about in terms of this planetoid or planet Nibiru housing or being where the Anunnaki live. I mean, yeah, can you talk about that? Because I know Zecharia Sitchin popularized that idea of Nibiru being a planet.
He says that this is a giant misconception, that this was a planet. He said it wasn't a planet, it was a huge spaceship. It was huge. And this is his clarification on the matter. And for those who have plugged into Zecharia Sitchin, this will give you a different perspective on his work and perhaps a clarity. I know it's been very popular with people who have followed the so-called ET movement, if that's what one could call it. But it's basically that simple. It's kind of saying, well, it wasn't quite the way people think it is. It's really a huge spaceship that was here to steward mankind into a state of evolution. What I would also say is that what's, I think, worthwhile contemplating with regards to this book is that everything that's being played out here has to do with taking place over a long period of time. We live right now what some people like to call the end times, but whether or not it's the end times, we're reaching a crescendo of civilization where so many things are happening so fast that it's like we're hitting a critical mass in terms of consciousness, or at least we think we are, because we can certainly gauge by the history we grew up studying and learning that things are happening at a much more rapid clip. So this makes us think that we are special in some respects, and perhaps we are. But when you go back to this, it's like all of this long, slow stewarding of evolution, some of which, if not much of which, is spontaneity, and random evolution is reaching a certain climax. And we are the beneficiaries of this, even if you consider us only as being entertained by it all. And I don't mean to diminish it by saying it's just entertainment. So this is what we're dealing with in what's being offered here. Long time. Things have been going on a long time.
So with this astrological component of DNA modification, I thought that was very interesting. I had never come across that before, where the positioning of this planetoid-sized ship, Nibiru, played a role in the genetic alterations. And in the book, it has diagrams showing how depending on how Nibiru is positioned relative to the Earth and the Sun, that astrological influence actually made a major impact on the DNA modification. So, yeah, that was a surprise to me. Can you elaborate on that?
Well, yes, I can, and I will say that by this book, and also by what's in the following book, the Etheric Crystal, it's quite evident, as it's simply stated, that the authors, and I say the authors, I don't mean just Radu, I mean his mentors, have a great reverence to astrology. But what I would say, and they don't mention it a lot, but they pay attention to it because it has to do with subtle influence. What I will say, and I do agree with you, it's generally not presented like this way. It's some sort of novel. On the other hand, if you study deeply astrology and Kabbalah and the interrelation between the two, you'll see that DNA is expressed in archetypal reference to the planets. And so basically, like say, obviously, warrior genetics would be akin to Mars. Venusian genetics would be akin to Venus. So we all have part of these so-called planetary archetypes in our DNA, and we all come out a little bit differently, a different blend. And that's what makes us unique as an individual. Aside from, because even those of us who have pretty similar DNA with our kinfolk, we're all different individuals. So, but basically, so the DNA does contain the archetypal influence of the planets, but there's even other studies where you can regulate or get an insight into what's going on with your body with regard to the planets. So there is a correspondence there. Now, when he talks about, and this is more like on the, I guess what you'd say, just like your astrology. Well, this is going to be a good day to do sports. This is going to be a good day to make love. That's on a day-to-day basis or a week-to-week basis. But with regard to the more major changes in the DNA, this is, yes, would be aligned with the stars having a subtle influence. It's a subtle influence. It's not necessarily going to be quantifiable in ordinary scientific terms. And the reason it's not quantifiable is because of the instrumentation, which is just not what they do. So
can I just kind of like interject, because
sure,
I want to
sure.
kind of get an idea of how this works, because people are familiar with the idea of astrology being relevant in terms of the precise time and location where you're born and the position of the stars, and that maps out your, gives you an idea of the personality, which has been incredibly accurate for a lot of people that explore that. And some apply that to the birth of a nation, like the United States. They say, well, July 4th, 1776, that also has astrological significance in terms of the role the United States has played as a nation. So in terms of this, what the information Radu Cinamar has presented, it seems that the human species, in terms of the modification or the latest update that these Sirians aboard this Nibiru spacecraft created, depending on the stars, the alignments of the planets, and the Nibiru ship, that kind of marks a particular species that they've modified with the characteristics that they want. Is that roughly correct?
Yes. But I would also say something that's important to mention here, which is not necessarily mentioned in the book, is that astrologers, I mean, there's all sorts of different types of astrologers, but there are astrologers who have told me you can put a piece of garbage or any instrument up into orbit, and you can astrologically correlate that. It can become like it might not be as influential as, say, a planet or an asteroid, but anything orbiting the sky can become astrologically referenced. So by that, what I'm alluding to here is that this huge spaceship, Nibiru, was what the name of it was. I don't know if that was the actual name. I think it was, but anyway, this planet has an astrological referencing of itself. So it becomes a big influence in itself. Now, the fact that they were in there doing things, steering basically the course of human evolution, but always as a part of that steering, they were leaving an open-ended agenda. Like, say, you might program this team to win, and if it's a sport, but you would leave an allowance there, 30–40% for it to lose. In other words, it has to perform, it has to respond, and it might not win if it's programmed to win. It might bring out an even better team. Who the hell knows? That's just an analogy from a sports perspective. But in other words, there is always this open door for spontaneity. What I would also compare that to is what's the so-called maverick element in evolution. They say there's always a maverick element in genetics that will defy everything. But that tends to be more like the green on a roulette wheel appearing. Doesn't appear very often, and it might even appear less than green does in roulette. So that's a principle of evolution, is you always have a random chaotic factor.
Well, one of the things that I found interesting from the Forgotten Genesis book was that it corroborated what's found in the Sumerian records. And, you know, while Sitchin was wrong about the Nibiru being a planet, that in fact it was a spacecraft, a spherical spacecraft that had this astrological influence. Nevertheless, he was right that the Sumerian records talked about ships coming out of that Nibiru planetoid, descending, and then began extracting precious metals, especially gold, and that this was, you know, the initial kind of like landing of this the Sirians or the Anunnaki from this spacecraft, and that eventually, because of the difficulty of mining gold and other precious metals, that it was decided that humans needed to be created as a kind of slave species. So yeah, I found that interesting. You want to comment upon that correspondence between Sitchin's material or the Sumerian records?
I haven't, as I told you before, I haven't really read Sitchin's material. I tried to read it. It was first pointed out to me by Al Bielek, and I couldn't make sense out of it. This is just, you know, it didn't resonate with me. I did get to meet him shortly before he died, but I asked him about the 24th gene pair, which he knew about, but he says no, and he gave me his last book. But I really just didn't resonate with him at all. So I can't really have any sort of intelligent or fair or expert comment on his work, because I couldn't really read it. I found it just not digestible to me. So just too dry and too hard, and, you know, although there are people who've taught it in college classes and who in fact, I actually have a question about that today from one of my new friends, Marina Sirian, somebody you might want to interview sometime. She's a Vril contactee. She's like a young woman. She was asking me about Enki and whatnot, and I'm going to have to talk to her about that later. But so I'm just really kind of not informed enough on Sitchin himself to really make any sort of fair or intelligent comment.
Okay, so the Sirians, or the Anunnaki, if we want to use that term, from the Nibiru spacecraft land on Earth, they begin mining and eventually decide that they're going to create a human slave species to do the mining on behalf of them. And so now there's the involvement of this whole kind of Enki versus Enlil. Now, I found that interesting because that appears in various Sumerian texts, such as the Atrahasis and the Radu Genesis, that talk about Enki and Enlil and Marduk and those guys. But in this book, what Radu Cinamar talks about, he talks about this being called Tenekau as a Sirian. So how does he relate to this whole Enki, Enlil, Marduk kind of Anunnaki pantheon?
Well, the author refers to it as the time of Tenekau, the moment when that remarkable extraterrestrial creature descended on the ground from the carrier ship that had come from the conflict in space and saw a large group of primates hiding in fear. He's watching a holographic image that's showing this. And one of the beings had the courage to get out of the bushes and get a little closer. Tenekau stops, and he had that, what's called a sparkle of genius, because he had an idea that they could transform these large primates into a superior humanoid. So in other words, this Tenekau comes down and he sees the apes, kind of like in 2001. And one of them stands out and, like, whoa, you're my guy. Maybe I can, this is very much like the 2001 incident, except that is a little focused on killing. The human being able to kill somebody, that's different. But it's this whole idea of the primate getting seeded by a higher being. Now, it's very interesting to compare that to today's world. You don't see human beings necessarily trying to seed animals, like saying, oh, that animal's, but I mean, people interact with animals. There are animal communicators and whatnot. And there is a communication between different species and human beings, but it's not in the context like this. It's not in the same context where you say, I see this lesser being and I'm going to make him a better man. But then again, it's also, this is what is happening in the New Testament when Christ sees these lesser beings and is trying to open them up to a higher frame of consciousness. This is what occurs in the tradition of Romania with Zalmoxes. Oh, we're gonna make you a better man. We're gonna make you a better woman, a better whatever. You're gonna transform. So it seems that this is an endemic part of the human process, is to aspire to become, like the Army says, be the best that you can be, only better, to put that in a comical connotation. But yeah, human beings have this definite idea of self-improvement that goes beyond becoming a better worker. And then when you mention the slave situation, slavery is apparently as old as mankind, and this only reinforces that concept, whereby even in today's world, you have people with better jobs and lesser jobs. So it just seems to, and then you have the whole concept of a beehive or a queen where everybody serves the so-called master. So this is just sort of the way the world operates, for better or for worse, to get work done.
Well, I know in the Forgotten Genesis, Tenekau is described as the father of mankind. He's described as someone who emanates a lot of bliss and deep respect for cosmic laws. So it does seem that that's referring to this being Enki, a geneticist, as opposed to Enlil, his half-brother, who was described in the Atrahasis as committing a great evil. So, again, is Tenekau Enki or someone else?
Well, I really, he seems to be somebody else. I'm really not that fluid with Enki because I haven't read the Sitchin work. So I really can't comment on that because I really don't know what I'm talking about. But he's portrayed as this sort of, yes, father-like figure who has X amount of wisdom and seems to know what he's doing. And even then he seems to know what he's doing. He's kind of sitting back and maybe smiling on humanity, saying, oh, I hope you all work it out. I wish the best for you. It sounds rather almost borderline conceited, but I don't really know. I don't know what it's like to be a god. It's like you could, if you had a bunch of dogs or something, or a bunch of animals that you supervised over, you could kind of pit them against each other or put them in situations where you had some sort of control. But no, I don't really know. I do know one woman that had a bunch of animals of different types. And I one time was in her very large kitchen, and they were all like standing at attention. Like, she says they didn't interact poorly with each other. And I thought, wow, this is remarkable. I said, so she says, yeah, they know to keep their place because they're all living together. She fed them all. So she was like their master. But I'm saying is, I really don't know what it's like to be in a position like Tenekau, where he's portrayed as a benign master of destiny. And I just don't know. I mean, it's like, yeah, you make some definite points there, but it's just a bigger picture of humanity than necessarily we care to think. And he also has the liability of trying to describe this to a outside audience. Radu is watching this in a holographic projection, which is deeply resonating with what's inside of his mind and communicating to him very personally, very personal, specific truths that he is taking extensive notes on and trying to convert it into book form. I know that he was very challenged by this book because he wrote this to me and told me how challenging it was. But nevertheless, he came out with it, and
Okay. Well, it does look like this Tenekau, I mean, whoever he is, I mean, it sounds like he's Enki, but, you don't know that, fair enough. So this Tenekau is involved in creating different branches of humanity, and he creates two primary branches that he describes as the ENL branch and the ENK branch. And in the book, you have a diagram. I'm just going to do a screen share so you can see it, where it shows the genetic strands, beginning with the stellar influences, beginning with, then you have the primate who is experimented upon, by Tenekau or Enki, if you like. And it seems that there's the L branch and the K branch, and the L branch has more of the extraterrestrial DNA within it, and the K branch has less. So do you want to comment about that diagram and about these two branches of humanity that Tenekau created?
Well, yes, he's basically saying that the extraterrestrial branch, or the ENL branch, is much more evolved spiritually, and the others are just kind of muddling along. And you can see whether he's specifically accurate about this or not. You can definitely see what he's saying in ordinary human beings, where some people are concerned with mostly feeding themselves and raw survival, and other people have much more elevated ideas of who they are, what they're doing, and what they want to be. And of course, one can be corrupted. The lesser beings can corrupt the higher beings. This also brings to light the characters in the book H.G. Wells's Time Machine, where you have the Eloi and the Morlocks, and the Eloi are the more highly bred, but it evolves into a situation where they become food for the Morlocks. It's sort of the other way around, and it switches where the lower beings take on, and the higher beings are kind of like, so I guess what you'd say, not doing any work, that they become food for the lower beings. So there's this constant push-pull, which is symptomatic of the way things work in the world. So I think whatever he's created here is a mirror, at the very least, is a very mirror of what goes on in evolution. He's challenged with the task of trying to describe it in terms that people can understand. And of course, it's very detailed, but he would be the first one to admit that the actual details are going to be far more complex.
So this differentiation of humanity into two groups, one with more extraterrestrial DNA that gives them these higher order abilities and they're able to meet with and interact with the ETs, and the other branch has less DNA, more of the primate DNA, and they're kind of more or less like a worker race, if you like. So it seems like the Sirians on the Biru, or if you want to call them the Anunnaki, they created, two prototypes of humans, one to be a superior race and the other to be an inferior race that would really just, provide hard work and service to the superior, who in turn would be subordinate to the Anunnaki. So is that pretty much the idea?
Pretty much. And of course, but you can see this in a corporation. We have the people that go out and do the legwork, and you have the executives in an office. And then you've got the person over that, or the stockholders, or the great manipulators. Not that they have to be that in a negative context, although they usually are. So it's just like, this is just one more, this is sort of what happens. And people are evaluated by their relative skills in work. And this is kind of like, oh, it's just like breeding. I used to breed this on farm. What is it? Plantations. They breed workers to be stronger and better on the physical level. And this is the whole idea of breeding. And in that respect, it's nothing new. In this respect, but in the respect is he's offering it in a completely new context. And he's basically telling us that what goes on in the world is not an accident. It's not an accident. So
it does seem this is connected in some way to this RH positive versus RH negative division between humanity, where 85% of people are RH positive and 15% are RH negative, and that 15% supposedly have more of the extraterrestrial DNA. Would that be accurate?
Well, I don't know if it's accurate. I mean, it's a reasonable projection. It's a reasonable projection. But one of the problems, and you probably know this as well, if not better than myself, is so many of the people in this ET world or advocating contacts are, stark raving nuts. So many of them are that advocate certain things or certain beings. So although they might appear to be of a higher intelligence or something, it's not. And this applies to the RH negatives too. It's like it's not necessarily an index to their intelligence or their spirituality. And then there's also a dark pall over many of this when you get into the more negative association with RH. I think RH negative, it can go either way. I think my personal opinion is that when you get these so-called evolved beings, it's just like two heads of a coin. It can go either way. It can go either way. And I think I would have liked to have seen him address more. He does address it somewhat, the nature of evil as it parlays into all of this. He does address it though.
One of the things that I found fascinating was that in the creation of these two branches of humanity, one having more extraterrestrial DNA than the other, is that some of the Sirians, including Tenekau, as I recall it from the book, chose to incarnate in the ENL branch, this branch that has more of the extraterrestrial DNA. So it seemed that that was one of the considerations for creating that branch, that would be more receptive to extraterrestrials themselves incarnating and then living on Earth in one of these physical human bodies, like an Adamic body, a perfect body, which I think originally was androgynous. And then you have the other beings, the ENK beings with less extraterrestrial DNA, that they would pretty much be ruled by these extraterrestrials that have incarnated into these ENL bodies.
Yeah, I mean, I hear what you're saying. It's, I think one of the big challenges here is, and he gives examples of that and say what I said earlier about these people living amongst us on the inner earth and from the inner earth living on the surface world. It sounds like there's all these people, but then again, they don't make themselves available for inspection, which is understandable to some degree, but it's also the fact is people are, what can I say? They're, by and large, humanity is not a species that remembers these things very well. And many of the people who, quote unquote, do remember suffer from other issues to the point where it wonders if they really do remember. So what I'm saying is there is, I'm one of the big problems that he faces is that when he talks about, particularly in the seventh book, the etheric crystal, is humanity comes up short. Humanity comes up short. Now, this is the whole circumstance of religions. It's like humanity comes up short. They need to be relieved of their sins. They need to get off the wheel of samsara and achieve nirvana. Humanity is in a bit of a snake pit, to say the least. So when you have this idea of these well-rounded, he doesn't use that word, but these evolved beings, it's kind of like you don't really see them too much, if at all. You might see them in your own visions or your own dreams, or you might, but many of the icons people choose, but that's more societal icons, you know, that they usually leave a lot to be desired. So what I'm saying is, this sounds very good, and perhaps it's good, but it's not something we really see. You know, this is what I have to say about it. It's like, where is the beef, so to speak, of this? And I think that he has a huge challenge, and maybe that's why his last book is so difficult and challenging, because he talks about these lofty ideas, but there's a certain point where it has to be delivered, which is the very essence of Messiah, means deliverer. So this becomes a point of critical mass with regards to what he is expressing or trying to express. And we could parlay that into the whole ascension concept of mankind ascending, because it's very easy to focus on the downfall because there's so much, it's in your face all the time, you know, just living in the world.
Well, I want to go back to this diagram again. I just want to kind of share that, showing the genetic strands. So it does seem from this book, Forgotten Genesis, that the extraterrestrials created these two branches of humanity because they intended to have some of the Sirians or the Anunnaki, whatever you call them, incarnate into this L branch, and they would become the new ruling class. And they did that because apparently Earth's terrain, gravity, atmosphere, and all of that was inhospitable for the extraterrestrials themselves, other than spending, just a short period of time, maybe in an environmental suit. So they had to create these beings, and then and that enables Tenekau or Enki to incarnate into the human body. And then later on, it talks about how these two branches, the L branch and the K branch, kind of created, intermingled and created a hybrid species, and that hybrid species were known as the demigods, and that matches what we know about this succession of rule on Earth from the gods to the demigods and then to human ancestors that's described in the King's List and in the Manetho's chronology of Egypt's rulers, that you did have this kind of chronology. So that diagram gives us an outline of how it happened and why it happened in that way.
Yes, yeah, very detailed. But then again, this brings back the whole concept of, it's like the ENL branch, the higher branch, incarnating, into a quote unquote toxic environment. It's too much. They have to have special genetics to come into it. It's like they can't tolerate, understandably can't tolerate the ghetto, so to speak. Nevertheless, they're moving into the ghetto. I mean, it's like, this is kind of and they're going to interact in the ghetto. And then there's a combination of it. When I stand back and look at this existentially, it looks like, why in the hell is anybody coming here? It's because it's like, it's just, I'm just looking at it existentially and saying, yes, it does explain so much of what's gone on this world, which of course this is the main predicament. Why does one come into this world? I don't necessarily see it so negatively as a human being, but when I'm confronted with this information, this is what it makes me think of. What were you all thinking in the first place? Well, even up to the so-called high alien level, what on earth were you people weren't thinking to even, deal with this bags of flesh? But anyway.
Well, this gives us an interesting framework for understanding ancient history, that, there was a minority of the planet that had this superior ENL kind of genetic makeup, and they formed the ruling class of civilizations like Atlantis, and that, the Atlanteans had their power divisions, but these were between those that had that ENL genotype in dominance in their own makeup, but that the surrounding peoples were the ENK, this kind of like less extraterrestrial hospitable genetics makeup with fewer abilities. I mean, they were hardier in constitution, but they didn't have the kind of psychic abilities, the kind of superior intelligence of these ENL beings, and that Atlantis imploded, and then these ENL beings kind of like escaped. They went into the inner earth and found places of refuge, leaving the surface of the planet to be dominated by the other group, the ENK branch.
Yeah, and this goes back to what I was just pointing out. It's like, with all of this great evolution, the whole story of Atlantis is one of destruction and, as you say, escape. And it's like, so this battle is like, it's a situation that it doesn't really get better. Yet, inside of us as human beings, we have hope. We have hope that somehow this ship can be corrected. If not the whole ship, our own individual ship. And that's what it all comes down to, is correcting our own ship so that we can survive all of this stuff. But that's exactly, the big game at work. What becomes, I suppose, the most hopeful aspect is, when he goes into Shambhala, and he really, this is perhaps the most beautiful and redeeming aspect of his work, is this connection to Shambhala, in the center of the earth, where you have harmony beyond belief. And the Shambhala is not identified with ETs, but rather with the inside of the earth.
Now, isn't Shambhala made up mostly of the ENL humans that escaped the surface of the planet because they saw that it was entering this period of degradation and barbarity? So they escaped into the inner earth and they went deeper and deeper inside, and that's how Shambhala was created.
Exactly. It's yeah, exactly. Well, Shambhala was not created by the ENL beings, unless they're sort of creating a adjunct to it, a reference frame of civilization within this. But Shambhala is created from the vibrational frequency that it emits out of a black hole, essentially. But this, yes, so yeah, it would be an identification with that inner period of harmony, or he's talking about these physical and etheric planes coexisted because of the frequencies of the planes were too close, were quite close. And then of course, it separates. It separates, and what you say is essentially correct.
So what would you say to those that have pointed to a very large spacecraft that is shaped, that has a sphere shape, that's kind of like almost as big as the moon, that has recently arrived in our solar system, and it's claimed that Enki is in charge of that spacecraft, that it is a kind of like conducting genetic experiments, and they're here to help humanity regain its original Adamic DNA. What would you say to that kind of information?
I have to ask you, because I have not heard of this, and if you could inform me. I mean, you just did, but if you could kind of give me just some more context of when did this start appearing? Is this been something that's actually been reported on objectively, or is this something that contactees are coming up with, or what is the context of this ship appearing?
Yeah, there are several people that have talked about this. There's Elena Danan, who's a contactee, and there's also there's an Army insider I've been working with, JP, that talks about fleets of ships arriving in our solar system, and that one of them is Enki's ship, and that he's here to help restore the original Adamic DNA. So this is an area of interest to a lot of people, and I'm just wondering if this is a cycle of history that is repeating itself, that this has happened many times in the past, where that, I mean, you called him, or sorry, not you, but Radu was given the name Tenekau, that he arrives and he's involved in the kind of like the genetic modification of humanity, that he considers himself the father of humanity. This is the kind of language that Elena Danan has used to describe Enki on board of this ship, which she also calls Nibiru.
No, I have heard of her, but I've never actually heard anything she said or whatnot, and I'm not so plugged into that stream of consciousness. So I really can't comment on it. It's my own personal, I guess, inclination that people should be more concerned about their own situation than they should about, trying to joust with ETs and whatnot. That's just my own personal orientation, but I can't judge that, and I can't really, I've just never heard this before, so I can't really comment on it, on that. If he's appeared, the problem is when these creatures appear, whether they appear ephemerally or not, they kind of don't stick around, and they kind of leave people holding the bag. It kind of attracts everybody as attention. This is the history of all of this contactee movement going back to the 50s. It's here, it's here, it's here, and then it kind of goes away, and then it comes back again. And this all comes back to what I was saying about the challenge of Radu is to actually deliver something that is tangible. And maybe that's not fair because, this is the whole situation with the Christian era. That which is tangible, if you reduce it too far to tangibility, then it's not spiritual. And so you've therefore, if you don't see the forest from the trees, it's not like you need a baby Messiah to hold up and show off. But this tends to be what happens with the contactee movement. It comes out and announces itself, and not everybody, but people pay attention to it, and then it goes away. So it's a consistent, repeated situation.
Well, it'd be very interesting to see what happens in the next 12 months or so, because I do think we are at a pivotal time in our history. I think these reports of different extraterrestrial groups arriving, this seems to be substantiated by the recent James Webb Space Telescope images showing things happening around Jupiter. I mean, you actually have HARP conducting experiments on Jupiter. So, there's empirical data showing that there's stuff happening around Jupiter, which is where these, both contactees and insiders have reported these fleets of ships have parked themselves. So something seems to be up, and we'll find out. But I know 2023 is an important year for all of us, because it seems to be the end of a cycle. Many people talk about that being the kind of the final phase of this kind of window of transition that we have. And I know it also coincides with the 20-year Montauk cycle, and you have something planned in
Yes.
Romania next year. So you want to tell us about that?
Yes, and I'm hoping you can join us on that. So August 10th to 14th, 2023, I've actually reserved and put a down payment on the Cioclovina Scout Camp, where Stephanie South and myself had, and I will explain her in a second, conceived of this idea to do a dream workshop during that special period. Now, Stephanie is she is the curator and disciple of Jose Arguelles, the author of The Mind Factor, who's responsible for Earth Day, Whole Earth Week, the Whole Earth Catalog. It was his teaching as a professor that inspired these things, and also for all this Mayan calendar phenomena that everybody got so fascinated with. But the Mayan calendar originates during that time period of August 10th to the 13th or whatever. It's known as the Lion's Gate, as I said. This was the Montauk biorythm, because this is when these experiments culminated in Philadelphia in 1943, Montauk in 1983. The chambers in Romania beneath the Sphinx were opened in 2003. The 20-year biorhythm is the strongest. Now, as I said, in 2003, we were waiting for something to happen. What would this big biorhythm be? And it was a huge blackout extending all the way into Canada, from centered around Preston's property in Cairo, New York, not far from Albany. Now, extended all the way to Montauk. Now, we were waiting. At the same time, we didn't know this till years later, that they were breaching the chamber beneath the Sphinx in Romania. Now, I posit, because of all that I've been through with the dates of August 10th to 14th, that there will indeed be a big occurrence in August 10th to 14th, 2023. And of course, I focused on the astrology for that, particularly with the location of Cioclovina Cave. And there is a kite, what is called in astrology a kite, in the configurations of the stars, which is a beautiful time for transformation. So because Stephanie's legacy is from the Jose Arguelles school, which identifies with, they use the base 20, the Mayans, the calendar used the base 20. That's why the 20 years is significance. Between her and myself, we're gonna cross-pollinate our legacies here and have what we call a galactic dream workshop I will be sending you personally, and as well as the others participating in this is a PDF or a book or something like this to help us cultivate our dreams, because this is a time not only to work on our individual dreams, but our bigger dreams, the dreams for humanity, the dreams for the galaxy. So we want you to bring your dreams, your personal dreams, whether they be to find out some of the answers to the questions you have that you brought up here tonight, or whether they're different or go beyond that. And of course, my dreams, her dreams, and everybody else who participates on a big level, in addition to our own individual personal dreams. And this is what Jose Arguelles did in 1970 at UC Davis. He took all of his students and he divided them into astrological groups by their sun sign and says, work on your dreams, work on your dreams. When he put all of them together, this is what created Earth Day, Earth Week. This is the magic of what he did. And I said, we need to take this and do it bigger. And she agreed. So we will, this is our first experiment or foray into this. We hope to make it much bigger. And we're hoping, and some of his students who are still alive are still carrying out their dreams, 50 years later, whatever it is. So this is activation of the dream. Let's say this, activation of the dream. And it's very exciting.
So where do people go to get more information about your books, especially Forgotten Genesis?
That would be skybooks.usa.com, skybooks.usa.com. You can go there. And you can also go to Kindle or Amazon and get the books through there. And they are in bookstores as well, some bookstores. We don't have as many bookstores as we used to, but they are available and ordered through the book market. Forgotten Genesis is the book we've been discussing today. It will certainly broaden your horizons on the potentialities as well as the history of mankind.
Well, I want to thank you, Peter, for coming on Exopolitics today and sharing information about this incredible series by Radu Cinamar.
It's a pleasure. Thank you, Michael.
You have been listening to Exopolitics today with Dr. Michael Salla. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this channel. Join or start a conversation in the comments. Take the time to explore the vast library of best-selling books, webinars, and podcasts by Dr. Salla. Visit exopoliticstoday.com.